We have all heard the words, "I am sorry," from someone, only to watch them repeat the exact same hurtful behavior a week later. It is a deeply frustrating, completely circular experience. Society often treats "I'm sorry" as a conversational transaction, a quick phrase to keep the peace. We accept the words as a social courtesy, rather than demanding a binding behavioral contract. This flowchart maps out the apology loop. It starts with an offense, triggering conflict, a verbal apology, short-term peace, and a repeated offense. Notice the massive gap here, the behavioral void. It's the empty space between a verbal promise and a lack of physical action. Accepting this void carries a steep cost. It drains your emotional capital and actively trains the transgressor that their bad habits carry zero real consequences. An apology without modified behavior offers no resolution. It is an attempt to control your feelings while the underlying problem remains unchanged. You can spot a fake apology early by analyzing the specific linguistic inputs the offender uses. The first red flag, conditional phrasing. Think of the classic, "I apologize if you were offended." That tiny word "if" shifts the locus of responsibility. It makes your sensitivity the problem, rather than their action. And then there is the blame-shifting apology. Here, the transgressor blames vague circumstances, the universe, or even you for what happened, actively removing themselves from the equation entirely. These verbal tricks are defensive mechanisms. They yield high short-term mental comfort for the offender, while trading away your psychological reality. To evaluate the validity of an apology, you must separate regret from remorse. Regret is internally focused. The offender feels sorrow only for the consequences they face or the punishment they received. Remorse is externally focused. It requires an admission of mistakes, empathy for your pain, and absolute personal responsibility. This matrix compares these two emotions side by side across primary focus, linguistic cues, blame, and action. The bottom line reveals a harsh trade-off. Regret yields temporary compliance to avoid backlash. Remorse is the engine for permanent behavioral restructuring. When the engine for change is missing entirely, we enter the realm of clinical pathology. This is the extreme end of the spectrum, psychopathy, where a person lacks the internal hardware to feel remorse or empathy for others. Clinical studies show that remorselessness is the strongest single predictor that an offender will repeat their harmful actions. Empathy and remorse are non-negotiable. They are the baseline emotional investments required to repair broken trust. To understand why a transgressor avoids remorse, we must look at a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental stress people feel when they hold two contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time. This theory was pioneered in the 1950s by psychologist Leon Festinger, who studied the discomfort felt when a person's actions contradict their self-image. Almost everyone views themselves as an ethical person. Committing an unethical or hurtful act creates severe internal stress. To resolve this stress without doing the hard work of changing their behavior, individuals use rationalization. Take disgraced lobbyist Jack Abramoff, who tricked himself into believing his unethical acts were justified to maintain his own self-image as a good person. Relying on cognitive dissonance yields high short-term mental comfort for the offender, but it guarantees they will repeat the mistake, undermining the core trust required for the relationship to function. What happens when someone genuinely wants to change, but still fails? The culprit is often post-error slowing. Post-error slowing is a neurological phenomenon where the brain's decision-making process temporarily decelerates after making a mistake. In this state, the brain wastes time dwelling on a past failure rather than computing the correct future action. Overanalyzing the error actually hardwires a mistake pathway. The more you obsess over the failure, the more likely you are to default to the exact same error under pressure. This maps directly to the danger of demanding immediate, flawless behavioral change from an apologetic partner. Cognitive behavioral restructuring is inherently nonlinear. Demanding perfection sets an impossible baseline, which only triggers the offender's defensive rationalizations when they inevitably stumble. Punishing yourself with guilt or demanding immediate perfection from a partner feels like progress. In reality, it actively increases the likelihood of repeating the error. How do we evaluate the exact return on investment of a relationship after an apology? This chart is the Trust Assessment Matrix, an analytical tool for measuring forgiveness. We plot the transgressor's accountability on the y-axis against their actual effort to change on the x-axis. The most dangerous zone is here in the bottom left, defined by low accountability and low effort. This is where delayed or partial change is weaponized against you. Contrast that with the only acceptable zone for continuing a relationship up in the top right. It requires high accountability and high behavioral effort. Entry into this zone requires more than just a verbal acknowledgement. It starts with an admission of the error, demonstrating a clear understanding of the specific harm caused, and outlining a concrete plan to prevent it from happening again. Words are cheap. Verifiable, plotted behavioral effort is the only reliable data upon which to base a relationship. If your partner's behavior maps to that active manipulation quadrant, the structural recommendation is clear. Walk away to protect your emotional capital. An individual simply cannot talk their way out of a situation they actively behaved their way into. If you are the one who needs to apologize, the path to genuine repair requires abandoning perception management. You must willingly endure the discomfort of admitting fault. Look at the devastating human cost when an institution refuses to endure that discomfort. Maintaining a false narrative over admitting a wrongful action destroys lives. True cognitive restructuring is not an immediate light switch. It is a slow, deliberate healing process requiring immense effort. Only invest your forgiveness in relationships where you can observe verifiable, active cognitive effort to change.